Amidst the ongoing development surge, the city of Boston is starting to explore potential benefits from converting some of its properties. A request for information was recently issued for more than 80 properties with an eye toward creating more affordable housing or mixed-use development. To tell us about testing the waters is the director of the city's Housing Innovation Lab, Marcy Ostberg. Thank you very much for being with us, Marcy.
Thanks for having me.
First, before we get into the details of shopping properties, I mean, what's the goal of this?
Yeah, so we're really trying to understand whether building housing with public assets such as libraries or fire stations can benefit our citizens here. There are a lot of other cities that are doing things like this. There's examples of libraries with housing on top and even fire stations with housing on top. And we're trying to find out, can that work in Boston?
What's the advantage of this kind of piggybacking?
So by putting these two important resources together, we can maybe use the city's funds more effectively. We can leverage private development to help rebuild our libraries and fire stations and get more affordable housing all in one. There's also a lack of or a limited amount of available land, which is part of the reason housing is so expensive. And so for using our city's resources most effectively to get more housing, that can help solve the problem.
You have quite a range of properties, even some very big office space properties too here. But what about the locations? Because when I look at a lot of these, wait, that's just down the street from a transit station or something. Developers would love that.
Yeah, so we tried to have a real diversity of properties that the city owns, from fire stations, community centers, libraries, but also non-traditional buildings that the city's using for office spaces, and also diverse across the city in different neighborhoods. And the reason we're doing that is to better understand what types of properties and what locations might work best for this. We're really crowdsourcing that information from developers and community members.
Well, if a developer responds to the request for information, and that's a term I'm still getting used to, what do they tell you exactly?
So we're hoping they'll tell us what ideas they have, how this might work, properties they're interested in, and also some of the mechanics of how this could work, the ownership structures they think would be most effective. And there's a couple things that the city will always keep in mind. We're not going to get rid of any of our assets. We want to make sure that our libraries and fire stations still benefit the public. So we're always going to keep our goals of better public services and more affordable housing at the forefront. But we think these applications might help us understand how to do that better.
Another thing here is about getting these properties on the radar screen for developers. I mean, some of them, they know what's out there. They've been around here, but I guess maybe some of them don't know these things.
Yeah, and like I said before, we're really trying to find out if this idea even makes sense in Boston. A lot of cities will do one special project like this. It's difficult to do, so they'll get one library with housing or one fire station with housing. And we're trying to get a pipeline and better understand if this is possible. If it's possible, what properties could we move forward with? Moving forward would mean a community process, a very significant community process on a particular site.
Now, of course, we've seen some buildings repurposed before. I remember going back a couple of decades, the city got rid of a firehouse downtown and got it rebuilt as part of a huge office tower. So, I mean, you can have things like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the steps for people who have some interest? You mentioned, I keep saying developers, but do you have to be just a developer to have something to contribute as far as information?
We're actually hoping to get a real diversity of applications. So community members could propose things. Maybe you're walking by your library and you have ideas of what could be done with that space, or your fire station. So we want those kinds of ideas as well as developers who do this business all the time. And you could have an official proposal, or you could just email in your ideas, whatever works best for you. So we want all kinds of applications. The deadline is March 23rd, and there's also an applicant conference on February 15th at 11:30 at City Hall.
I noticed that some of these buildings, I've heard that the city wants to replace them or at least fix them pretty seriously. But on the other hand, some of them seem to be in pretty good shape. And saying you don't want to get rid of those.
Right.
But so why include those in the list as well?
Yeah, I think none of this is going to happen quickly. And so we're just getting a sense of where and what kind of properties would make sense. And this could be a very long-term pipeline. But we wouldn't redevelop anything that was just recently done. That's true.
Another thing that occurs to me, and this applies to many of the properties on the list here, is that 20 or 30 years ago, we wouldn't have been using the word mixed use very often. Because in those days, we say the residential over here, the retail over there, and community, city things should go down in this other area. We don't think that way anymore.
Yeah, I think mixed use is what we're aiming for, and this is just a particular kind of mixed use, especially for libraries and housing. That's just kind of like having commercial space on the ground floor and housing above. It's a little more complicated with things like fire stations, but it has been done, and there's noise buffers and other kind of procedures that can be in place when a fire station is in a neighborhood. So there's ways to do this effectively.
We should mention one more time how people can follow up, because you've got the website and
Great.
the conference we should let them know about.
Yep, so the conference is at 26 Court Street, downtown Boston on February 15th at 11:30. And you can go to the Housing Innovation Lab's website to find out any more information on this.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Marcy Ostberg from the Housing Innovation Lab.